Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm very honored to give this presentation. This is a window into the observation systems. Not all of you are familiar with this field. And this is even a narrower view, which is the in situ observation systems, which are the systems that are actually in the water. I'm not going to address the satellite imaging system, which is, of course, a necessary complement to the in situ component. So I will try to see if I can use the pointer as a start. Yep. Okay, so the outline of my presentation is as follows. I will start with giving you an overview of the ocean processes that take place, the variables that are derived, and the in situ observing systems that we use to observe the ocean, extract those variables, and understand those processes. And of course, as I said, this is a very narrow window, and geographically speaking, I will only focus on the European projects that deal with that, that have dealt with that in the last 4 or 5 years, to show you the emerging technologies and the emerging ideas that came up from the European Commission Ocean of Tomorrow programs. And I will finish my presentation with some examples of the end-to-end integration that René was introduced in his talk this morning, which is quite important these days, especially with respect to the research infrastructures, Copernicus, which is the European program for environmental monitoring, and the GEOS, using interoperability standards. This is quite an interesting diagram where you can see the variety of processes and how they scale in the ocean from the millimeter scale to the thousands of kilometers, and in time from milliseconds to hundreds of years. So here from the bottom down, you would have the molecular processes, and top right, climate. And so in the middle, you have all sorts of processes taking place, from tides to plankton migration, fronts, eddies, filaments. This has been extracted from decade 2003, by the way. And this shows how you should handle the ocean when you start planning a monitoring strategy. And what are the tools that you should be using for monitoring the ocean? There are specific tools that serve a purpose and others that serve another. Very few serve all purposes. So you have some overlap as well, as you can see here. Satellites here for the remote sensing part looks at a narrow picture, which is actually broader than the one that you would expect from moorings in situ here. But in situ you have the benefit of being a reference in time. They stay where they are, and they're maintained. They're very costly in general to maintain, and that's why we cherish them, and we use them as references for all about the rest. So you also have mobile platforms, and the mobile platform has the benefits of moving through scales, which is a very nice complement of moorings. So this is an example of the diversity of in-situ systems, and why we also have, once we have agreed on the fact that we need this diversity, that we go into deeper into the choice of the variables that need to be monitored. And in the ocean, and some scientists here are aware of that, but technologists probably less. In the ocean, we have communities arguing every year at conferences and debating about what is essential to be measured. So, of course, you always have this person at the back of the room saying, well, you know, what I think is essential is the worm that is down there in the sand next to my backyard and so on. And, of course, it's very important and so on. But, well, we have to define some criteria to actually choose these variables on a common basis globally, so that we can also address cost, which is important. As you know, it's costly to work in the ocean, it's costly to measure in the ocean, to process the data, and so we have to consider cost, and we have to consider feasibility. What is feasible to measure today and what is not? There are variables that are not yet possible to measure on a continuous basis at depth, for instance. Some contaminants are very difficult to measure at great depth today because the technology is just emerging. And the relevance, what is the impact of the variables? So we have to always consider these aspects. And so that's why we have this type of meetings taking place, like this Atlantos workshop, where we actually confront essential ocean variables to technology readiness level. So basically, well, essential variables are several. Not only in the ocean, you have the climate, ocean variables, which also have a set of essential elements, which actually is overlapping with the ocean variables, and which is, of course, quite logical and obvious, especially for climate and oceanic climate variables. And you've got the biodiversity variables that are overlapping as well, and essential variables for weather, which are overlapping. And these are generally different communities that meet sometimes and debate and so on. But it can last for ages, and of course, we also that helps us decide at some point through these type of committees and conferences, decide which are the directions to be taken. So we have to admit that we cannot measure everything, nor we need to. The variables are driven by requirements. They have to be rooted in reality, and measurements must be feasible. Basically, this is the type of projection that we use for choosing where we should invest our efforts. This is, working. So, and the target investment should be a combination of high impact and high feasibility. And that links then to what is possible to do technologically speaking. What is ready today, what will be ready tomorrow, and how we should think of the remote future. And from concept to maturity, from ideas to good, well-known technologies, which is also sometimes referred to as technology readiness level, from level 1 here at conceptual idea to level 9 when the system is mature and commercially available. So this is an example of the type of classification we have in essential ocean variables, which is here the physical, biogeochemical, biology, and ecosystems. And whether they are at conceptual stage in terms of maturity, pilot phase, or mature. As you are well aware, for salinity, generally there's great maturity in the system, very good precision, very good accuracy. For biogeochemistry, well, we are also quite well. There is, of course, a need to improve the integration on deep platforms, on mobile platforms, and so on. But on the biology and ecosystems, then we are facing difficulties, especially where, just to give you an example, the apex predator abundance and distribution, mangrove cover, phytoplankton biomass and productivity, harmful algal blooms, and so what is the incidence of these blooms, etc. So this helps us, again, say, all right, what is the status? Where can we go? And what do we need to add to these set of variables to be really as objective and as useful as possible as a community? Here you can see that from this Ocean Ops Research Coordination Network, which is funded by NSF, they've come up as well with extra essential variables for biology. As you can see here, microbial species and abundance, invertebrate species and abundance, coral species and abundance, submerged vegetation species and abundance, sea turtles, seabird species, marine mammal species. which were not in the first place, and which are now new recommendations as EOVs. Then, once you have all clear what you need to measure and how you need to do it and where, you also need to consider the fact that the observing system of systems and the monitoring services has a value chain. And when you consider cost, this is very important, because this is actually where, if you want to reduce cost, you have to start dividing the chain in small elements to understand exactly where you should work. And for instance, should you work at reducing the cost of mechanical components? Should you work at reducing the cost of sensor installation? Or should you work on any of those and make let's say, an objective and honest analysis of the system in order to improve it in terms of cost? And this is actually what these Ocean of Tomorrow projects are dealing with, partly. Some more specifically on the science, others more on the commercial projection of the developments. And so I will then go through that a bit later. So yeah, you can see, right, so how costly is it going to be? This must be enormous. That must be something that we just can't attain, can't reach. And of course, if we look from a personal basis or from a laboratory basis, we think, all right, what can I do? How can I contribute to that framework and produce data and so on? Well, humans have been very tenacious, very enthusiastic, and as you can see here today, this was extracted from actually from JCOM Maps May 2017. These are the observing systems in the water at this moment in the world. Well, at least the ones registered under these programs: Argo, GoShip, OceanSight, GLOS, SOD, DBCP. And so, as you can see here, there are thousands of systems in the water monitoring every day. And still we are saying, all right, we're not there yet. Where is the data? Where is the data that makes us understand the biology? And what are the things that we think we measure and or we don't measure that are useful? Contaminants, for instance. You've got to see that as also something a bit misleading sometimes, because you can also see that as an undersampling of the ocean. The larger you make the dots, and the easier it is for you to cover the whole planet. But actually here, what the system is made of is tiny bits of equipment that measure, that represent something like 10,000 square kilometers each. And so that gives you a scale of how undersampled the ocean is, despite the number of systems in the water. So there are challenges, and from these challenges, we derive requirements and developments. The challenges come from GOOS. In Europe, they're complemented with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive for good environmental status, and all these aspects which I mentioned before. And that leads us to this European call and all the opportunities that today we have in terms of technology, new autonomous systems. They go deeper, they're commercially available. There are mobile and fixed stations. There are new middleware solutions linking to the Internet of Things mentioned before on the interfacing, the Web of Things technologies. Community practice of and standards also emerging from the GEO initiatives like the Blue Planet. And so there are lots of interesting things happening. Miniaturization allows us to go smaller and then deeper with mobile platforms as well, like the lab-on-a-chip concept, and embedded processing capabilities, which, thanks to our smartphones and so on, now, of course, allow us to do whatever we want in terms of processing on square centimeters. So there are some innovative products, of course, that are coming up, and to answer all these questions and to bring material to the other efforts, biosensors for contaminants and multifunctional sensors These are the two aspects I will put the stress on in this presentation. So with regard to biosensors, you had the opportunity this morning and in the past days to learn about some projects like the SMS project. So this morning at the workshop, some of you were present. This is a system that measures algal toxins, flame retardants, pharmaceuticals, so based generally on immunoassays which use antibodies, antigens, and which are not there yet to fully commercial phase, but probably in the 2-3 coming years, these people will be able to say, all right, this is how much it costs to have water quality measured on the beach there or where you have your aquaculture farm, and the system works, it has been validated. So it goes on a buoy, and it can work autonomously for a period of time, let's say 3 weeks, 1 month, then you have to maintain it. So it can't go in the deep ocean yet or far offshore. You have to have close maintenance logistics. The Bravo system is another. There are actually 5 biosensor projects running at this moment, based more or less on the same concept of using antibodies and modules that goes into something things like a carousel here installed on a buoy or a moving platform. These systems are evolving very quickly now for all sorts of contaminants, also using here the lab-on-a-chip solution. NVGuard is another of these projects, for especially designed for aquaculture activities. And I had a nice feedback from this project here, because I wanted to know what was the technology readiness level here. Most of the components here are reaching something close to commercial, but as soon as you have one of these components that is low, then of course you can't make it. This is a sum of components actually to make the full system integrated in the end working. You would like to have all those at TRL9, but well, that needs still some effort. This is the type of system, as you understand. You would not be able to put it on a deep glider, for instance, at this moment as it is, but also for all sorts of reasons, because maintenance of these types of systems needs regular interaction. This is the C-on-a-chip system, which is also based on antibodies and biosensors here for measuring contaminants. So this can float and can be installed near an aquaculture farm or anywhere you need to measure trace metals or where you need to measure contaminants, algal toxins, or algal blooms. Mario Box is, I think, the last one I wanted to show, which is made of a biosensor for 5 man-made chemicals and 4 categories of microalgae toxins. And again, this is a system that is supposed to be installed on something bigger than an autonomous vehicle. And then I will show you some innovations taking place closer to the commercial level, and that can be integrated then on the platforms that you have heard of, like buoys, gliders, autonomous vehicles in general, and deep sea observatories, for instance. So there have been 4 projects funded, and so I will go through them very, very briefly, just to give you an overview. SenseOcean has built a system based on a lab-on-a-chip technology, so it started in 2013, like the 3 others. And the objectives were actually to do analytical science, but to do it through innovative techniques like microfabrication, improving the system integration, and to be cost-effective so that you couldn't go for mass production. So using low-cost mechanical parts was important in that project, and that allows us then to reduce the cost of fabrication. When you reduce the cost of fabrication, then you can scale up your production. If you scale up your production, you reduce the price, and then you make it accessible to the broader community. So that was the idea, and while they had several awards, here you've got some photos of the lab-on-a-chip system, the CO2, a CO2 microsensor, and optodes here measuring several species of gases that can all go into small vehicles and make the best of the technology we have that is so far very limited in general in terms of sensor payload, salinity, temperature, chlorophyll. And so this increases a lot the potential of all these systems that you've seen before. The Schema project is another project that is also meant to be producing commercial solutions, and these commercial solutions are here for chemistry, most of it. With analytical chemistry taking place on board autonomous systems here, measuring different species of metals, heavy metals. So for contamination measurement, here also measuring nutrients from carbonate to nitrate, and also measuring several algae classes as, classified as toxic algae here. So quite a multi-purpose system here, as you can see, that fills in a frame and can be used for specific purpose or broader purposes. Common sense is the third one, where they've been working on several solutions to integrate, commercially speaking, as well as a standalone solution, pH, PCO2 temperature, nutrients, microplastic, heavy metals, and underwater noise. So these are separate solutions that can come integrated under a sensor web framework, and that you can probably choose which component you want to use. Sometimes some are necessary, sometimes they are not. Temperature sensors generally integrated on mobile platforms already, but underwater noise is not. You may want to combine these two. Well, if you have some questions on these projects, I invite you to contact the coordinators who are present in the conference. And Nexus is another of these projects, and I will go a bit more into the detail here because, as was mentioned this morning, we would like also to see how all the data and this tsunami of data that will come up will integrate in the data layer that is accessible to all communities and the public. So in Nexus, we've developed different sensor technologies, optical, basically multi-functional optical technologies out of the same sensor, measuring one variable in the past. Now you would be able to measure several variables through combinations of wavelengths, or using hyperspectral cameras for extracting, for instance, groups of phytoplankton. So these are now nearly commercially available. Or, for instance, integrating a full carbon cycle solution, measuring carbon dioxide and pH from a same floating platform like that one here was tested in Norway recently. These are meant to go to the deep on deep platforms like here the Sea Explorer glider, or stay on the surface on this type of wave glider, or here on this type of vehicle, which is a sailboat. Passive acoustics was another development of Nexus, where we developed a solution actually to fill the gap between what can be done coastal and what can't be done offshore. Today, there is no acoustic data made available from offshore. Why is it so? Well, it's very difficult to go offshore first, it's very costly, and second, once you have raw acoustic data, you need a very costly satellite channel to transmit it real time, or you need to store it in hundreds of petabytes of storage before being able to exploit it. You don't want that, basically. You want to pre-process so that you send only the relevant bits of information through satellite, and at very low cost. So we've developed these technologies, so merging basically a highly integrated circuit board with very good quality hydrophones, so that we can put them on these systems and measure acoustic information in the deep. This is the last technology of Nexus in terms of sensing technique and support. We are using platforms of opportunity here based on phishing trolls, where actually these platforms of opportunity are very useful if you are able to produce highly robust sensors that don't get in the way of the fishermen and produce the data and just send it as soon as they go back to shore. And so the system existed before Nexus with salinity, temperature, turbidity, and so we've added chlorophyll and oxygen as 2 additional probes, and so they are under test today. So again, increasing the capacity out of what we have with very low cost or cost-effective technologies. So these are interesting developments. Of course, all these sensors are basically useless if you don't have platforms. I'm sorry I have to go very quick through the slides because I have so many, and so it may look like a movie for some of you, but I hope you are enjoying it at least. So there are also some projects taking place in Europe right now with respect to platforms. We go deeper. We go mobile and fixed. We keep fixed platforms something very interesting in terms of reference and for deep sea observation, and they go standard. So EMSO EDGIM is a module that has been presented, I think, by Jean-François in the conference, and Bridges is another project for a glider that is taking place right now as we speak. EMSO EDGIM is a module basically to answer the needs of the newly formed EMSO-ERIC consortium. And so we've been looking for a standard solution or a de facto standard solution that could be applied to all the nodes of EMSO. So EMSO has come up with this idea of saying, right, you know, we all discuss things and we do PowerPoints and paperwork and so on, and we go at sea and we come back saying again for the last 10 or 15 years that we need a standard solution. So we finally decided to build it, say, all right, it might not be perfect, but at least there is one thing to start from. So there's this frame with different sensors, temperature, conductivity, pressure, dissolved, different types of pressure sensor, of course, static, but also differential, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, ocean currents, compass, and tiltmeter, passive acoustics, and from these we start with a basic set. And from that basic set, then you can, of course, increase and add sensor if you want. And the system can be deployed either standalone or through cable. It's big. You can't just put it on an unmanned vehicle, for instance, at this stage. But it sets a reference. It sets a milestone. And we are very glad to have this development today. So I wanted to just highlight this point. This was for the fixed solution in terms of innovation at this point as a platform, but there is also good work taking place not only in terms of mobile platform, but also in terms of sensor integration and integrating actually the sensors that you've seen in my former slides on mobile gliders and to go deeper. This is the Bridges project. Some of the members here are in the room. It builds upon 2 technologies, basically one by LCMR, which is a Sea Explorer that would go to 700 meters depth, and the AutoSub technology by NERC. And from there, they designed 2 new systems, which is a Deep Explorer and an Ultra Deep Explorer. One is for 2,400 meter and another to 6,000 meter. So I think this is going to be very promising. Well, despite some aspect that needs to be probably worked out, 400 kilos, you can't just drop it from a Zodiac. But that's the only drawback, I would say, at this moment for these systems. Let's see how is the cost. And of course, different types of monitoring strategies are turning up, like this type of spiral monitoring, trying to increase the potential of all these systems. So here you can see the sensor payloads for a typical activity, which is water column habitats. So I have very little time for data layer. I wanted to say a few words on that, and that's an important bit of my presentation. Unfortunately, I will have to skip most of it, and so I will stop, or you will stop me, but I will just give you an overview. End-to-end standardization is the aim that we have in several of our activities today, making data available and visible and exploitable. And that leads us to the solutions that exist today, not only in the ocean observing community or Earth observation community, but broader, like the Internet of Things. So basically what we are looking forward to, and that's what actually we are trying to develop in Nexus, in Common Sense and Sense Ocean and Schema, an integrated solution. Some of the projects work more on the operator IT component, which is closer to the user. In Nexus, we've decided to go even deeper and in the interoperability exploration and demonstration, which is actually to have the sensor fully informed and equipped with that driver in a standard format so that you can swap sensor, don't reduce the cost of integration each time you want to add a sensor to a platform, which generally is very costly. And so this is the type of solution that we are testing at this moment, like OGC PAC, sensor ML as a standard payload that can feed into this standard and compressing that information. When you add metadata to a driver or whichever information you add to data is something bothering the scientists, for instance, say, well, I know all about my sensor, why should I put all this information? But if you say, right, but this information now has to go public because we want open data, then you have to put it. But then if I put it, then I have to pay for the overhead. Transmitting it through satellite costs me a lot. And so you say, all right, so let's compress it. And so we come up with solutions as we get feedback. And that's what we are testing at this moment. And it works. It's just a matter of putting the efforts and goodwill in it. The solutions are there. Here, from the platform to the IT component, you've got several formats available, but here we've worked on XML. You've got, of course, the data delivery for some of you here in NetCDF, but it's not incompatible. There are several paths that can be chosen. But here, what I wanted to say is that there is an integration of standards. It's not like I'm using one and it doesn't work with the other, and then I have to work 10 years to make sure my system gets operational. No, there is support. There are open source tools available, and so it's just a matter of wanting it. So these are the benefits of this type of philosophy, I would say. Is the seamless integration of newly collected in situ observation using a common layer of standard services, reducing software integration costs using open source solutions, and this is possible, it's available, you can contact me if you are interested. Reduce maintenance via new standard concept in sensor interoperability, that is, well, if I have hundreds of sensors, and if I'm the OOI or EZO, NetEMZO, and I'm dealing on a day-to-day basis with hundreds of sensors, then I also want to have an inventory that can be updated on the spot whenever I want and digitally. And so if you had all the information on the sensor flowing through the web, and you would be able to map all your inventory and know exactly what would be the status and the types of sensors you have through this type of framework. And sensor operation maintenance record and data provenance can be encoded from the sensor to the application that the user uses. And this is what you would end up with. That is a map of sensors and your time series. No matter how complex it might look when you look at all the modules you need to get that implemented. And yes, I think I will stop here. Had a lot to show you, but unfortunately I'm running out of time. So maybe you can put the last slides on my presentation. And if you have questions, I would be happy to take them. So I hope this this has not gone too fast, but I wanted to offer you this overview from the technology point of view, from the standard point of view, and all these emergent technologies that are being developed right now. There are lots of efforts, and we hope that the European Commission will keep sponsoring us developing those, because I guess there is great potential. Thank you very much.